Brushstrokes and Breakdown. Chapter 1. The Long Way Home. The sun clung to the edges of the Utah horizon like it didn't want to let go. Orange-red cliffs faded into violet shadows as Jane Smith guided her camper van northward. The windows cracked just enough to let the desert wind mess with her hair. She'd been on the road for almost 6 months, long enough for the silence to feel like company, long enough to forget how to answer when someone asked what she did for a living. Because how could she explain it? She painted. Sometimes landscapes, sometimes dreams. Sometimes the inside of her chest, made visible in colors only she seemed to understand. The van rattled beneath her, just slightly, as she pressed the gas. Her gut tightened, but she forced herself not to look at the dashboard. Not now. Not yet. She'd left Hurricane that morning with a full stack of canvases wrapped in bubble wrap and duct tape, all stored carefully behind her tiny bed. The paintings still smelled like mineral spirits and sun. She'd been wild with her brush in the desert, painting mesas that looked like sleeping gods and cactus spines shaped like wings. There was something ancient about that place, something sacred. Something she didn't have words for, but she'd poured into canvas like rain in cracked soil. It had been magic, but magic didn't last. Her phone, cradled in a cup holder, buzzed with a new voicemail. Her mom. She hadn't listened to it yet. She didn't need to. The text had said enough. Need help. Rehab center's short-handed. Can you come home? Home. Tahuya, Washington. A little cedar-shingled house at the end of a gravel road where orphaned raccoons ate better than she did growing up. Jane's fingers flexed around the wheel. Just make it to Bend, she muttered to the van, half prayer, half command. She'd heard about Bend from the Nomad forums, a town where the full-timers stopped, where vans and buses and schoolies parked like a secret society. If she could get there, she could rest. Maybe find a mechanic who didn't talk down to her. Maybe figure out what to do next. The desert had given her so much. She wasn't sure she was ready to leave it behind. The van lurched. Jane's breath caught. A sputter, a cough, then the engine steadied again. But it felt off, like something internal had slipped loose, the way her stomach did when she thought about showing someone her paintings. Don't panic. It's just an old van. It's always been a little dramatic. She pulled off at the next turnout, parked under the shadow of a bent juniper tree, and stepped out. The air was dry and cool. Sagebrush dotted the landscape like punctuation marks in an unfinished sentence. Opening the back hatch, she checked on her paintings. Still secure. She grabbed her camp stove and a small kettle and boiled water for tea. Her hands shook more than they should have. When the tea was ready, she sat on the bumper and stared out over the rolling desert, the wind tugging at her hoodie. She thought of her grandmother, whose money had bought this van. You don't need a real plan, Grandma had said on her last hospital day. Just take the leap and paint what you see. That's enough. But was it? Jane had painted her heart out, painted until she ran out of canvas and breath, but she hadn't shown a soul. Not really, just a few casual glances from van friends who'd nodded and said, "Cool stuff." Now she was supposed to go home, help with the rehab center, be useful again. She could already see herself back in that house, scrubbing raccoon cages and bottling goat's milk, her art tucked back in a box, forgotten. Another sputter from the van. This time, it didn't recover. She dropped her cup. No, no, no! She jumped into the driver's seat and tried the ignition. Nothing. Her pulse hammered. It was nearly dark. There was no cell service. No one around. Breathe. Just breathe. She climbed into the back, wrapped a blanket around herself, and lay down. The sky outside deepened into navy, scattered with stars. Her chest ached, not with fear, but with disappointment. She was so close. Bend wasn't far. She hated asking for help, but tonight she might not have a choice. She closed her eyes and tried not to think of the worst-case scenario. Tried not to imagine her van towed to a shop that would charge her more than she had. Tried not to think about explaining to some greasy stranger why a shy girl named Jane Smith was living out of a rolling tin can full of dreams. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like painting. Chapter 2. Bend in the Road. The morning came with a hush, no birdsong, no traffic, just stillness, and that faint metal groan as the sun warmed the roof of the van. Jane sat cross-legged on her bed, chewing dry granola and trying not to think about the silence under her hood. She'd tried the ignition twice already. Nothing. Not even a cough. Her phone had 1 bar of service now, just enough to pull up the closest mechanic. Bend Auto and Metalwork. 1.3 miles. She stared at the listing. The photo showed a squat, steel building tucked beside a rustic-looking sculpture garden. A bear made of gears and motorcycle chains stood out front, paws raised like it was mid-roar. Of course, this was Bend. Mechanics and metal artists were probably the same person. Jane slung her bag over her shoulder, locked up the van, and started walking. The desert behind her had turned golden, the edges already softening with morning heat. Every step toward town felt like a step further from the world she'd carved out these last few months. Solitude, space, her own rhythm. But her mom needed help, and the van wouldn't fix itself. She passed a food truck park and a hand-painted sign for a pottery studio. Finally, she spotted the rusted bear again, towering in front of a building that looked like a hybrid between a repair shop and an art barn. She hesitated at the front door, then pushed it open. The bell above her rang, and the smell hit her first. Motor oil and acetylene, metal filings and coffee. A tall man with dark curls under a grease-streaked cap looked up from the counter. His hands were covered in grime, and he was holding what looked like a sculpted tailpipe dragon. "Hey," he said. "Lost or broken?" Jane blinked. Broken. Van won't start. It's a 2001 Eurovan parked about a mile back near Juniper Pass." He nodded, setting the dragon down carefully. "You're not the first traveler she's eaten alive? Want me to tow it in?" "Yes, please. I'm Brian." "Jane." He wiped his hands on a rag and disappeared into the garage. A moment later, she heard the rattle of a diesel engine. When he returned 20 minutes later, her van hitched behind an old flatbed. He gave her a small grin. "She's a bit cranky, but she's got potential. Like most artists." Jane stiffened slightly. "How'd you know?" He tilted his head. "Canvas wrapped in bubble wrap, paint under your fingernails, and that 'please don't ask me about it' look on your face." She looked down. Sure enough, a faint streak of cobalt blue lined the edge of her thumbnail. Brian didn't press. He waved her toward the back. "You can hang out in the workroom while I run diagnostics. Coffee's on the bench. Try not to trip over anything sharp." The back room was half garage, half gallery. Large windows let in light that danced across metal sculptures, some rough, others surprisingly graceful. A phoenix made from rebar hung above the door. Jane poured herself coffee and sat on an overturned crate. Her fingers itched for her sketchbook, but she didn't move. Instead, she watched the way light caught on a sculpture of a twisting tree made entirely from bicycle chains. Brian returned after an hour, wiping his hands again. "Your alternator's toast, and your battery's running on fumes. Could get you a new one by tomorrow, maybe the day after. Parts are a little slow right now." Jane's stomach dropped. "How much?" He rattled off a number that made her heart clench. Not impossible, but it would leave her with barely enough for gas to get home. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. Brian studied her, not unkindly, just reading. "Listen, no pressure. But if you're in town a few days, you might check out Juniper Collective, local gallery down by the old mill. They're doing a community show this weekend, open slots for visiting artists." Her eyes widened. My stuff's not gallery ready." Brian shrugged. "Neither was mine, first time. You ever welded a dinosaur from exhaust pipes?" She almost laughed. Almost. "I just paint," she said. "It's not good." Brian leaned against the doorway. Funny how the people who say that are usually the ones worth paying attention to. Jane looked away, her pulse kicking up. Compliments didn't sit easy with her. Praise always felt like a setup. "Do what you want," he added, voice gentler. "But if you've got something in that van worth fixing, I'd bet there's something on those canvases worth showing." He left her alone after that. Jane sat a long time. When she finally walked back to the van, she opened the back hatch and stared at the canvases. One showed the jagged red cliffs of Zion, wild brushstrokes swirling like heat waves. Another captured the desert at night, blues so deep they felt endless. Her favorite was a quiet scene of a woman standing alone under a Joshua tree, arms open to the sky. She touched the edge of the canvas, then pulled her hand back like it burned. Maybe it was easier to live in the van than let people see inside it, but her van couldn't take her any farther today. Chapter 3, Rust and Resonance. The next morning, Jane sat at the tiny fold-out table in her van, half-heartedly sketching the view from the lot. A rusted fence, a leaning pine tree, and the metal bear sculpture she'd passed on the way in. Her coffee had gone cold, her pen stuttered on the page, and her thoughts chased themselves in circles. She hadn't visited the gallery. She hadn't even walked past it. Instead, she'd stared at her own paintings again, touching them like they might tell her something. But they didn't whisper reassurance or magic. They only echoed the truth she didn't want to say aloud. She was terrified. What if no one understood what she saw? What if no one cared? She jumped slightly when someone knocked on the van's window. "Brian." She rolled it down. "Hey. Gallery's open this morning," he said casually. "I know the woman who runs it, Angela. I mentioned your work." Jane flushed. "You... what?" Brian just smiled, not unkindly. "She's curious. Asked if you'd swing by with a piece or two. No pressure." "I'm not..." She trailed off. "I'm not ready." He scratched the back of his neck with a grease-stained hand. "Funny thing about art. Nobody ever feels ready. I still think half my stuff looks like scrap metal with delusions of grandeur." She looked at him then. Really looked. He wore oil-smudged jeans, a faded t-shirt, and his eyes held the kind of patience you only get by surviving your own self-doubt. "You sell yours out front," she said softly, gesturing toward the phoenix and bear. "Yup, and sometimes I hear people whisper, 'Who would buy that?'" He grinned. "But then someone does. That part matters more." Jane opened the van door and stepped out. The morning sun was cool on her skin, and she pulled her sweater tighter. "Would it be weird if I just brought one?" she asked. He shrugged. "Bring 3. Worst case, they say no. Best case, you sell one and leave with more gas money than you came in with." She hesitated. "I don't want to owe you anything." Brian shook his head. "You don't. I've been where you are. That's all." His words settled somewhere deep, where the shame sat. She wanted to believe him. part of her already did. She selected 3 canvases: the desert nightscape, the Joshua Tree Woman, and a thunderstorm over Canyonlands. She wrapped them in a blanket and loaded them carefully into the back of his dusty pickup. Angela met them at the gallery with a warm smile and arms full of mismatched bracelets. "Ooh, these are raw," she said, fingers brushing the edges of Jane's canvases. "Good, I hate polished." Jane couldn't speak. She just nodded as Angela leaned the pieces along a wall near the front window. "Let's put this one up," Angela said, holding up the Joshua Tree piece. "She belongs in the window." Brian glanced at Jane. "Told you." Angela looked over her shoulder. "Opening night for the local shows tomorrow? Just a casual drop-in crowd. You want to include these?" Maybe?" Jane's voice cracked. Her chest felt too small for her ribs. Angela grinned. "That's a yes. Let me know by tonight. These pieces breathe. People will notice." They left the gallery together, Jane gripping her sketchbook like a lifeline. She hadn't spoken more than 10 words inside, but it had felt like an earthquake. "She just said yes," Jane whispered as they walked. Just like that. "Sometimes the hardest door to open is the one to your own work," Brian replied. Back at the shop, Brian surprised her again. He opened a side door Jane hadn't noticed before, leading into a sunlit corner with a high ceiling, 2 metal stools, and a long, paint-splattered table. A skylight shone overhead. "I was going to clean this up for welding, but you could use it while you're here. Studio space," he said. Jane blinked. "Really?" "You'll paint better with a table than a van bed, I figure." He handed her a worn shop key. "Just lock up when you're done. Angela said if you want in on the show, drop the names and prices by tonight." She stepped into the space and took it in. The quiet, the smell of metal and sawdust, the promise it held. The overhead light fell perfectly across the work table, turning the dust motes into tiny planets. Her fingers began to tingle, and just like that, she knew she'd say yes. That night, back in her van, Jane wrote the title cards on the backs of 3 canvas frames. "She waits in silence. Where the storm broke. Desert doesn't apologize." And then, carefully, she wrote the price: $400 each. She stared at the number. It was more than she'd ever dared. But as her grandmother once told her, if it's worth doing, it's worth being a little scared. Chapter 4: Gallery Talk. The gallery buzzed with soft conversation and the faint sound of acoustic guitar floating through the open door. String lights looped from beam to beam, casting warm halos over the artwork on the walls. Jane stood near the back, pressed against the cool brick, her hands locked around a paper cup of punch she wasn't drinking. Angela had hung her pieces front and center. Jane had wanted to disappear. It was all too much. The way people stopped in front of her paintings, tilted their heads thoughtfully, leaned in. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but that almost made it worse. Every glance felt like a judgment. Every sideways smile like confirmation of her deepest fear. That she had no right to be here. She tugged at the hem of her sweater and tried to breathe normally. Brian appeared at her side, a to-go coffee in one hand and what looked like a plate of chocolate-covered almonds in the other. "You look like you're preparing to bolt," he said. She didn't deny it. "I shouldn't have said yes," she muttered. "I should have just waited for the van to be fixed and gone home." Brian handed her the coffee. "And missed hearing strangers praise the insides of your heart? Seems like a missed opportunity." She glared at him, but her lips twitched. "You're very annoying." He nodded solemnly. "It's part of my charm." He didn't leave, just stood beside her, quietly, solid. Angela passed by in a flurry of gauzy sleeves. "You sold one," she sang over her shoulder. Jane blinked. "What?" "The woman under the tree. She's going home with someone tonight." Jane's knees went weak. She turned to Brian. "You sold your phoenix," she whispered. He grinned. "More than once. But you just put something real into the world, and someone saw it." Jane's heart thudded. She scanned the crowd, trying to find who had bought it. That painting was the most personal one, the most exposed. She spotted her then, a teenage girl in a long denim skirt and high-top sneakers, her mom beside her. The girl looked back at Jane, and their eyes met. The girl smiled, timid but full of something Jane couldn't name. Jane looked away quickly. "I can't breathe," she whispered. Brian nodded. "That's how you know it's real." They stepped outside into the cool night air. A few guests milled about under the eaves, wineglasses in hand, laughing softly. Jane sat down on the edge of the sidewalk. Her hands trembled. "Did I really just sell something I made?" she asked. Brian sat beside her. "Yup, and you made someone feel something. That matters more." The tension in her chest shifted. Not gone, but looser. Like her ribs had room now. "I've been so scared of being a fraud," she admitted. "Like if people knew where I came from, how messy everything is, they'd see I'm not supposed to be here." Brian picked up a small stone and rolled it between his fingers. "I used to think that too. Grew up in a house where nobody thought art had value. Welding was a job, not a voice. But somewhere along the way I realized we all start messy. It's not about permission. It's about truth." Jane didn't answer. She didn't know how. Instead, she stared at the gallery window where her remaining 2 pieces glowed under the lights. People were still looking, still stopping, still thinking. She'd done something that mattered, even if it scared her. Angela came out and handed her a sealed envelope. "Payment, minus gallery cut. Also, someone else asked about your Canyonlands piece. Said they might come back in the morning." Jane stared at the envelope. "Thank you," she said softly. Angela touched her shoulder. "Keep painting like that, and you'll be back here in no time." After she left, Jane held the envelope like it might fly away. Brian nudged her shoulder with his own. "Think you're still just a girl in a van with a dusty name?" She smiled, then laughed, a real one, from the belly out. "Maybe a girl in a van with a dusty name and something to say," she said. He stood and held out his hand. "Come on, I want to show you something before the night's over." They walked around to the back of the gallery where a row of rotating outdoor sculptures stood. His latest was there, twisted copper and chain, shaped like a bird mid-dive. "I thought it was broken," he said, staring at it. "Didn't come out how I pictured. But Angela said it's her favorite, said it's about flight and surrender." Jane looked at him. Maybe broken things just tell different stories. He nodded. They stood there in silence, side by side under the stars, the night air cool and clean. For the first time in a long time, Jane didn't feel like she needed to run. Chapter 5, Canvas and Courage. Jane arrived at the studio space early the next morning. Dew still clung to the windows, and the light pouring through the skylight turned the dust into gold. Her breath fogged slightly as she unlocked the door, heart fluttering in her chest. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the girl from the gallery. The way her smile trembled when she looked at the painting. The way she held her mom's arm like she wasn't sure she deserved anything beautiful, but wanted to try anyway. Jane knew that feeling. She also hadn't opened the envelope yet. It sat on the table next to her paints. Too heavy for paper, too light for peace. She turned instead to the canvas she'd set up the night before. A fresh start. She didn't know what it would be yet, only that her hands were aching to move. Brush, paint, water. She let the memory of the gallery night flood through her. The faces, the light, the terrifying pulse of being seen. And slowly, a scene emerged. A woman walking forward into the desert, her long shadow stretching behind her, dissolving into a horizon line of gold and blue. By noon, her hands were stained and her heart steadier. Brian stopped by with a sandwich and a crooked smile. "You open it yet?" She shook her head. "Not yet. Kind of afraid it'll break the spell." He sat on a paint-streaked stool. "Maybe it'll build the next one." She slid the envelope toward him. "You open it." He raised an eyebrow. "It's yours." "Exactly, which is why you should do it." He didn't argue, just tore the seal and pulled out a folded slip. Then he whistled low. "Well, damn!" Jane braced. "What?" "You, my friend, are now the proud owner of $560 real after the gallery cut." She blinked. 500? "And 60, he repeated, "for something you painted in the back of a van." Her hand went to her mouth. She sat down slowly, as if gravity had doubled. "That's enough to cover the part," she whispered. He nodded. "And a tune-up, plus gas to get you home." She didn't answer, just stared at the envelope like it had turned into a miracle. But beneath the relief, something unexpected stirred. Grief. She had what she needed. She could leave now. And somehow, she wasn't sure she wanted to. Brian caught the shift in her expression. "What are you thinking?" She took a breath. "That I thought this trip was just about making it home. But now it feels like something else opened. Like I got permission to dream differently." He tilted his head. "Permission's always been yours. Just needed someone to say it out loud first." She looked down at her hands, smudged with burnt sienna and navy blue. "I'm not good with people," she said. "I don't do gallery talk or sell myself well. But when that girl looked at my painting," her voice cracked. "I think she saw me, and I saw her." "That's the point," Brian said softly. "That's art." They sat in quiet for a while, the space breathing around them. Finally, he stood. "Hey, I've got another idea. Angela's been asking about a local artist spotlight for the fall. Small solo exhibit. 1 wall, maybe 8 pieces. She's thinking September." Jane's eyes widened. "You're not allowed to say you're not ready," he interrupted. "We already established that's irrelevant." "I live in a van," she said. He laughed. "You live in a rolling studio. Think of the story." Jane smiled despite herself. "Just think about it," he said. "Studio's yours as long as you need. No rush." He left, the screen door creaking behind him. Jane turned back to the painting in progress. It looked like a beginning, or maybe a home. She picked up her brush again, and this time, her hand didn't shake. That night, she called her mom for the first time in a week. "I can be there by next weekend," Jane said, voice soft but sure. Her mom sounded tired, but grateful. "No rush, sweetie. Some volunteers have shown up. People who used to help. But I'd love to see you. Stay as long as you need down there." Jane looked around the studio. "I might need a little longer." After the call, she wrapped the Canyonlands piece in a clean drop cloth, ready for pickup the next morning. Another buyer had followed up. 2 out of 3 sold. Her van would run again, But more than that, something inside her had shifted. Like her name, her story, her heart were no longer things to hide. They were ingredients, materials, worthy of being shaped. She signed the bottom of her new piece, J. Smith. No apologies, no hiding. And then, for the first time since leaving Hurricane, she slept through the night. Chapter 6. Old Paint, New Road. Jane stood in front of her van, hands in her back pockets, staring at the now silent bear sculpture outside Bend Auto and Metalwork. The new alternator purred like a satisfied cat. Brian had just finished the test drive and given her the go-ahead. "She's running smoother than I've ever heard her," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Jane smiled, though the knot in her chest refused to untangle. She should feel triumphant. She'd sold 2 pieces, paid for the repairs in full, and still had some money left. But something about leaving this town felt heavier than it should. Brian stepped beside her. "You look like someone who's supposed to be happy and doesn't know what to do with it." She chuckled under her breath. "Sounds about right." "You heading out today?" She hesitated. "Was planning on it. My mom's stable for now. Said I've got a few days." He nodded. "Studio's still open, you know, and Angela says she's saving your wall." Jane turned to him. "You think I could really do a solo show?" He shrugged. "I think you already started one." She looked back at her van. It shimmered in the late morning light, the paint a little dusty, the windshield a little cracked, just like her. And maybe for once, that didn't mean she was broken. "Okay," she said slowly. "What if I stay just a little longer?" Brian smiled. "Thought you might say that." Over the next week, Jane made the studio her own. She brought in her favorite brushes, tacked up new inspiration sketches, and painted like someone who'd been given permission, not from others, but from herself. Each piece she started felt less like a test and more like a conversation, a memory, a truth. On Thursday, Angela stopped by and reviewed her progress. "These are stronger than the last ones," she said, eyeing a new piece, a coastal scene of Tahuya's fog-wrapped shoreline with colors that bled into one another like secrets. "You're painting with your gut now." Jane smiled. "It's the only thing I trust lately." Angela tapped the canvas. "This goes in the show. So does the one with the pine branches and the night sky. I'll reserve your wall. September 15th. Call it a homecoming." Jane blinked. "That's my grandma's birthday." Angela's eyes softened. "Then it's already blessed." Back at the van that night, Jane sat under a blanket and sorted through her travel sketchbooks. She'd always planned to turn them into something, maybe a zine, maybe a blog. But now she saw a real possibility, a printed book, a collection of road stories, paintings, moments that might speak to the girl who didn't believe her name was worth remembering. The idea sparked something. Not a fire yet, but a flicker. The next day, Brian caught her photographing her art in the best afternoon light. "You planning to leave us famous?" he teased. She laughed. "Just prepared. I might be brave enough to share this online soon." He nodded. "If you do, people will find you." She swallowed. "That's what scares me." He leaned against the doorway. "It's okay to be scared. Just don't stop." On her final night in Bend, Jane brought a batch of prints to Angela, smaller versions of her new paintings. She priced them low, unsure what to expect. By closing, half had sold, enough to cover her groceries, a tank of gas, and the Wildlife Rehab Center's next supply of syringes. When she packed her van the next morning, the studio looked different. Lived in, loved, not just a temporary stop, but a cocoon. She left a thank you note on the work table, scrawled in paint-streaked handwriting. You gave me a space to believe again. For that, I will never be the same. Jane. As she pulled onto the road, she didn't look back right away. She let the trees blur into motion and the sky stretch wider. But when she reached the edge of town, she paused at the stoplight, rolled down her window, and took one last look at the rusted bear guarding the shop. Her van purred, and this time, so did her soul. Chapter 7. Roots and Wild Things. Tahuya greeted her with rain. Not a storm, not a downpour, just that gentle, constant drizzle the Pacific Northwest offered, like a hand on the shoulder. The trees were greener than she remembered, thicker somehow. Or maybe she'd just gotten used to the desert's honesty, all raw edges and open skies. Her van pulled into the long gravel driveway, like it was finding its way home, too. Jane parked near the small cedar-sided house and climbed out, her boots squishing in the damp grass. A raccoon watched her from the fence post, barely blinking. "Still your territory, huh?" she said softly. Her mom came out from the porch, apron smudged with something brown and possibly alive. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice was weary, but warm. They hugged tightly, longer than either of them expected. Her mom smelled like cedar, coffee, and goat milk, just like always. Inside, not much had changed. Stacks of towels, bins of syringes and baby bottles, laminated feeding schedules, a faint smell of pine disinfectant. "Still wild in here," Jane murmured. Her mom chuckled. The creatures never left, but the helpers almost did. Jane spent the next few days caring for owls with eye infections, feeding abandoned raccoons with tiny droppers, and taking slow walks through the woods behind the property. The work was grounding, physical, repetitive, but her sketchbook never stayed closed for long. One morning, Jane found her mom in the kitchen, stirring honey into a chipped mug of coffee. "You want one?" her mom asked, reaching for a second mug without waiting for an answer. Jane nodded and slipped onto the bench by the window. Rain tapped the glass gently, the soft kind that never really stopped. Her mom handed over the coffee and sat across from her. "Place is running smoother now," her mom said. "Thanks to you jumping in." Jane shook her head. "It's mostly the other volunteers. I just show up with droppers and wash my hands a lot." Her mom smiled. "Still helps." They sipped in silence for a moment. Then Jane glanced up. "You remember when I left? I said I didn't know what I was doing?" Her mom raised an eyebrow. "You mean when you packed a van with paint and prayers and drove off with no plan?" "Yeah, I recall." Jane laughed softly. "It felt like that at first, like I was running from everything, but it wasn't really about running away. I think I needed to be alone long enough to hear what was in my own head." Her mom leaned back, hands cradling the mug. "And what did you hear?" Jane exhaled. "That I've been hiding, that I've been waiting for someone else to tell me I'm allowed to show up as I am, that I've been afraid that my past, my name, even how I see the world, none of it was enough to make something real." Her mom's gaze softened. "Sweetheart, you come from a line of women who stitched their worth out of whatever scraps they had. I did it. My mother did it. And you—" She reached out and touched Jane's wrist. "You're making something beautiful. Don't you dare downplay that." Jane swallowed hard. "I sold paintings, Mom." Her mom's eyes widened. "You did?" Jane nodded. "Two in Bend. People I didn't even know. They saw them and they felt something. That's what changed everything. Not the money, not even the gallery. Just the knowing that what I made mattered to someone else." Her mom smiled, quiet and proud. "That's everything, baby. That's the whole point." "I think I want to do a solo show this fall," Jane added almost shyly. Angela, the gallery owner. She offered. Said September. I said yes. Her mom reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Good. I'm glad. Your grandma would be proud of you. Jane blinked back tears. I think I'm finally proud of me too. They sat there a while longer, listening to the rain, sipping slowly. Her mom eventually rose to check on a fussy squirrel in the incubator. Jane stayed seated, hand warm around her mug, and for once, didn't feel like she needed to be anywhere else. Later that day, Jane drove into town and found the local wildlife rescue group. They were rebuilding their volunteer team and thrilled to have someone with experience. Jane signed up for part-time help, 2 mornings a week, enough to stay connected, but leave room for painting. Back at home, she cleared out a corner of the old shed and turned it into a new mini studio. Drop cloth on the floor, light strung across the beams, her bend prints pinned to the wall. Brian had texted that morning too. Sold the diving bird last night. You were right. Broken things tell better stories. Hope you're still painting. Let me know when the solo show goes up. I'll drive up if I can. Jane replied with a photo of her pine-scented studio space and a single line. Still painting. Still scared. Still going asterisk. That weekend, she brought a print to the local bookstore. They hung it in the window next to a sign that read, Local Artists of the Sound. When she stepped back to look at it, a young girl with curly hair stopped beside her. Did you make that? The girl asked. Jane hesitated, then smiled. Yeah, I did. It looks like here, the girl whispered. Jane nodded. That's because it is. Chapter 8. More Than a Name. September arrived with the slow hush of turning leaves and misty mornings. Jane stood just outside the Juniper Collective Gallery in Bend, brushing invisible lint off her jeans, heart pacing like it had somewhere more important to be. Inside, her name, J. Smith, was printed cleanly at the bottom of a poster framed in the entryway. Featured artist, Brushstrokes from the Road. A solo collection by J. Smith. Opening night, September 15th. She took a slow breath. This wasn't a cameo anymore. This was hers. Angela greeted her with a one-armed hug and a glass of sparkling cider. You did it, kid. Jane smiled, nerves crackling like static under her skin. Thanks for seeing it before I could. Angela grinned. That's the thing about artists. We're always the last ones to believe it. The gallery lights bathed the room in a warm glow. 8 pieces hung along her wall, each chosen for the way they told the journey. From the hot, untamed cliffs of Utah to the moss-covered edges of Tahuya. From the first brushstrokes of escape to the full circle of returning, transformed. She watched as visitors wandered through. People tilted their heads, murmured things to each other. A woman in a felt hat studied a print of the storm painting for several minutes before writing a check. Jane didn't float this time. She stayed grounded. Not hidden, whole. Brian showed up halfway through, holding 2 travel mugs and wearing a flannel that smelled faintly of pine smoke. Brought you a road trip latte, he said, from your favorite food truck. She grinned. You didn't have to drive all this way. Didn't want to miss it, he said. And thought you might want this. He pulled a small package from his pocket. Inside was a necklace, a tiny welded charm in the shape of a paintbrush crossed with a spark. Jane touched it gently. It's beautiful. Scrap metal from your old alternator, he said. Thought it might mean more that way. She looked at him, then down at the charm. I've been thinking about writing a book, she said suddenly. The road, the van, the paintings, all of it. Not a big book, just something honest. Brian nodded. Seems like the kind of story someone out there's waiting to hear. Later, as the crowd thinned, a girl no older than 15 approached Jane shyly. I just wanted to say, your paintings feel like what my insides look like, she said. I didn't know anyone painted like that. Jane's throat tightened. That means more than you know? The girl smiled and then darted off before Jane could say more. As the evening wrapped up, Jane stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars blinked above the quiet town, and a familiar ache stirred in her chest. Not fear, not longing. Something gentler. The road still called to her, but so did the studio back home. The wildlife center. Her mom. The girl in the bookstore. The quiet rhythm of staying still long enough to grow. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small card. Angela had given her one of the last gallery checks, folded with a note. Keep painting. The world's not done watching you yet. She smiled, and this time she believed it. Jane opened her van door and slid into the driver's seat. She turned the key and the engine came to life with a steady hum. On the dashboard sat a small sticker she'd stuck there that morning. More than a name. She backed out of the lot and headed toward the highway. Not to run, but to ride the edge of what was next. Not all roads led home. Some led deeper into who you were becoming. Next stop, the Tetons. She'd found the cabin listing a week ago, a hand-built place at the edge of the mountains, nestled in a small valley near a trout stream. 6 months, no Wi-Fi, wood stove, big windows, enough space to think, paint, and finally write the book that had been sketching itself inside her since the desert. A book with paintings and journal pages and small reflections. A story about breaking down and blooming anyway. She'd already told her mom. Already paid the deposit. The van was full of canvases, notebooks, and enough tea to last a winter. She wasn't sure if anyone would read her book or if the paintings would sell. But she knew this. She was an artist. She was a storyteller. She was going.